This is such an amazing day, Jim Kelly. Some days we woke up in Austin, Texas, and had watched the commission vote 3-0 to grant a permit where the commission head, behind closed doors, had met for days with ASARCO's lawyers. Some days we'd wake up and look out on that horizon when all 3,000 of us, Robert Ardavino, were sitting there saying goodbye to ASARCO, and in our heart of hearts we're wondering if that day would ever come. Some days these students who got up to march on City Hall in an administration, a new one that really had not formed its policies around environmental protection, to demand that the city take a stand at that time, wondered if in fact that was going to happen. This is a great day. This is a day for celebration, for reflection, for honoring Danny Arellano's dedication and bravery. When he would stand up to a former employer who kept offering him benefits, employment, money to shut up, and he would say, I am never going to shut up. I am going to do the right thing for my community, and I'm going to do the right thing for the workers at ASARCO, and I'm going to do the right thing for my children, because my children deserve a better day in the sun in El Paso, Texas, than we had in our 30 years of working at ASARCO. You know that, Danny. Your bravery, your courage is an inspiration. Today's a day of celebration for Bert Williams, El Pajarito. Here's a guy who got up when industrial interests basically ran the Chamber of Commerce here and said, we got to take a stand for people and children. There is lead in their blood, and it is going to kill them. And I'm going to do something no one's ever done. I'm going to stand up and say, it's not right to poison our kids. It's not right to poison our air, and we need to solve this. And right after him, and his administration, when the pushback came and an industrial business interest re-elected a mayor that got 9 pediatricians to sign a letter that said, CDC, leave town. Leave town because we'll take care of our kids, and tried to kick the CDC out of town. Did you know that happened? Bert Williams stood for something that's very rare in politics here, which is the courage to do the right thing. Bert, we want to thank you personally for what you've done. Mayor Cook, your leadership in making steadfast leadership at the city to pay the attorneys that made the fight happen took a lot of political courage. And I want to thank these 2 freedom fighters right out here on this front row. Veronica Escobar, could you rise and take some applause? And Susie Bird, Representative Susie Bird. It was Susie Bird and Robert Ardavino and the students at UTEP that made that happen up there. But as we celebrate today, a transformational day in El Paso's history, 100 years of a polluted past, and now a complete new future of clean air, clean jobs, and student leadership at UTEP like we've never seen. You guys are an inspiration when you come up here to lay out this future. You guys talking about Parque de los Fundidores. You guys talking about a research park here. Guess what? You're going to make it happen. Because it's that new brand of leadership, the Si Se Puede, yes we can, and frankly, get us to yes. We're tired of people telling us no. Get us to yes leadership is exactly what we need in this community. As we reflect today where we are, I want to set the stage for what we have to do next. The next stage is we got to get that place cleaned up. I'm going to lay out what the TCEQ told us in Austin last week. You remember this permit was not granted. The EPA came through with a momentous decision. It's the first dividend of the Obama administration. When they said you have followed law that does not exist, you don't have a right to a grandfathered permit. You have to go through a new source review. And they laid the stage for the closing of ASARCO. So now we have to pick up the pieces and say, where do we go next? The next stage is we want a clean site. This community has to say, scrape, pave, pump, and crypt doesn't work for us. I'll explain what that means in a minute. This community has to say, like Omaha, like Tacoma, like Dallas, like San Antonio, We want a develop-ready site, and we need to get it done, not in 26 years, in 3 years. Let's talk. This is the history of the ASARCO site, the modern history. Yeah, 1999, they ceased operation because the price of copper went to 67 cents a pound. In 2002, they had a pending application to put 7,000 tons of pollutants back into our air and took the position that it's a grandfathered permit, and basically we had no say in their permit. That was their legal position. In 2004, the TCEQ referred it for hearings here in El Paso, Texas. 2 weeks of hearings took place. Danny Arellano, Get the Lead Out, the city of El Paso, John Cook, others took a strong stand to say we don't want this air permit renewed. The two judges said, you're right, it shouldn't be renewed, and it went to a hearing before the TCEQ in 2008. In 2008, 3 commissioners voted 3-0 to grant the permit, and we'll talk a little bit about that history as we move through this process. 2009, the EPA under President Barack Obama said you followed the wrong law, you don't get a grandfathered permit, you got to go back to 0. And that day, ASARCO announced, we're closing up shop in El Paso, Texas. That's what happened. That's the history of the permit here. Now here's the bankruptcy. This is a real important part of this history because this is the template for what polluters are going to try and do across America in the future. This ASARCO case is being watched everywhere from DC to Sacramento, from Austin to other capitals, because it provides the roadmap of how polluters intend to shed environmental liabilities, worker healthcare liabilities, pension liabilities, and start over. In 2005, they declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy. $25 billion of claims were filed in that bankruptcy. People saying, you owe me money because you didn't pay your bills, or you left 100 years of lead in our soil. 11 billion of those were environmental related liabilities. ASARCO workers who had never been paid on their pensions. ASARCO workers with asbestosis in their lungs that was literally killing them. Those claims are pending in Corpus Christi today. Now let's talk about what's really happening in that bankruptcy. Over the course of 18 months of operation, they have $1 billion in the bank. When the price of copper was $3.67 a pound, ASARCO made money, so it's sitting in a bank account. Last year in Brownsville, Texas, the American subsidiary, ASARCO LLC, sued Grupo Mexico and won a lawsuit and said, Grupo Mexico, you had stolen the only solvent asset called a Peruvian mine, and won the lawsuit to pull this Peruvian mine back into the debtor's estate. That Peruvian mine may be worth as much as $5 billion. So ASARCO, the bankrupt debtor, has $1 billion in cash, just won a lawsuit to move a $5 billion mine in, and the bankruptcy judge has said, this asset of ASARCO here, the mines in Arizona, the plant in Hayden, what you've got in Corpus and Amarillo, your other places, the minimum bid is $1.8 billion. So you've got cash on the table in the bankruptcy, and it's a real important part of our strategy. Let's not talk about Superfund. Let's talk about getting the money out of the bank, because the bank is the bankruptcy. That's where the money is. Next slide. This is ASARCO today. 3 states, 2 countries. This is the Pass of the North. The historic Pass of the North is right there where the river goes through on the UTEP side and the Mount Cristo Rey side. This is our future. Our past was defined by ASARCO. Our future is going to be defined by what we do on this site and how we brand ourselves with what we choose to do with this important piece of our future. On-site remediation. This is the guts of what we want to communicate today. This is the chart that the TCEQ gave us on how they're going to pay for this cleanup. And I want to show you what they're talking about. This is the 100 acres of the ASARCO site. ASARCO owns more than 500 acres in this area. What they're talking about in their plan is only this 100 acres. They want to scrape it, they want to pave it, they want to pump it, and they want to crypt it. Now what does that mean? What they want to do is they want to pay $52 million to do this. Right underneath ASARCO are millions of gallons of arsenic-laden water. We never knew in this community the scope of what was under that ASARCO site. So $22 million of what they want to do is to put 80 pumps around the site, put a groundwater treatment plant there, and pump the water out for the next 50 years. That's the pump it part. The next part is to demolish what's there, run a big blade through and knock it down, sell the scrap metal, and then take $10 million and pave it with asphalt. They do not propose to take the lead out. They do not propose to move significant parts of the fines and slag that are there. The next part is they want to build a 500-foot by 500-foot by 33-foot coffin. Here in El Paso we'd call it a crypt. And in that they want to put the most toxic soil that they have there and leave it on site forever. That's the solution with the fines, with the slag that has the most lead in it. And then they want to take and build a $3 million fence around the site at ASARCO. How did this happen? How did we get this plan from the TCEQ? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But when we talk about scrape it, pave it, pump it, and crypt it, that's what they want to do. And all they're talking about is this 100 acres. The true site, which is 500 acres, has no part in the plan. There is no money put in the plan for the cleanup of the black soil that you see to the north of I-10. There's no part in the plan to clean up the 2,200 parts per million of lead and arsenic that is in those hills right behind UTEP and going all the way to Executive Center. Not one sentence in the plan relates to that. So the first post-ASARCO movement that we need to commit to is we want more. We want a developed, ready site that we can take and make into something, and we want the money coming out of the bankruptcy court. And can we do it? Yes, we can. Can this community make it happen? Yes, we can. Are we going to do it? Yes, we can. We didn't come this far to be left with a permanently polluted site that has no uses. This is the map that the EPA gave us when we first started about the scope of pollution of lead and arsenic in El Paso after 100 years. Lead goes up, lead goes out, lead comes down. That's where it lies in El Paso. They've tested 3,200 properties, cleaned up about 1,000. In Omaha, they tested 32,000 properties and have cleaned up about 3,900. When we talk about this with the EPA and we talk about it with the TCEQ, we have to remember on-site cleanup, off-site cleanup. On-site cleanup, off-site cleanup. We want this community cleaned up on-site, and we want the true scope of the pollution off-site. What happened over all these years is that ASARCO in the 40s and 50s cut up the black slag, put it into bags, and sold it as fertilizer in northeast El Paso, in Mayfield Terrace, and some of the newly emerging neighborhoods that later became Eastwood and parts of East El Paso. And the EPA has never come back with a plan for what to do with those neighborhoods. So our goal is on-site cleanup, off-site cleanup, to make sure that this community in the next 3 years gets cleaned up. Let's look at why we don't want the TCEQ to do that. Let's just take, if you will, Carl, a short history of our dealings with the TCEQ. For 3 years, the TCEQ permitted ASARCO to burn Rocky Mountain arsenal waste without a permit in El Paso, Texas. When the EPA found out about it, they fined them $20 million and said, you've been engaging in illegal activity in this community, and there has to be a price to pay for that. No one went to jail for what were obviously illegal activities. Number two, they've never even identified the issue with the fertilizer. They've not talked about it, did not come forward with a plan on how to clean it up. Number 3, when it came time for the judge in this case to get a clear idea of what the airshed of El Paso looked like, they let the TCEQ hired ASARCO's own expert to measure our air and then give that plan back to the TCEQ. Right before the meeting, right before the famous meeting where we went down to ask for the permit and have the permit be denied, the chairman of the TCEQ had been meeting with his lawyers and others secretly with the lawyers for ASARCO. How did we find that out? The lawyers for ASARCO filed in the bankruptcy to get paid, and in there they detailed multiple meetings, secret meetings, ex parte meetings with the chairman of the TCEQ. Forced the city through $1.4 million of taxpayer money for a process that the EPA later said was flawed. You can't get a grandfathered permit. So they made this community go through a legal proceeding that really had no basis in fact. And finally, the $52 million cleanup. Where would you suspect that they got the engineering and consulting plans on our cleanup? It should be pretty clear to you now where they got the plans from ASARCO. Why? The lower the cost to clean up, the more the profit you can take out of the bankruptcy. So if our cleanup is $52 million instead of what it should cost, then those in charge of the bankruptcy get to walk away with more of the money from the bankruptcy court. That's what's happening. What do we want to do? The first thing that we want is to have a congressional committee come down here under a new administration and take testimony on how these permits got into place, why the hazardous waste that was burned there from DOD arsenals was never reported, and what's going to happen with these workers. These workers need their health back. These workers' families need to be compensated. The first thing we're going to ask is that Congressman Markey and Senator Lautenberg come to El Paso, Texas and conduct hearings here. The second thing that we want is for our community to get behind a real cleanup plan that will clean up on-site and off-site. The $52 million plan from TCEQ needs to be put in the trash can. It will not get the job done. It does not include the millions of pounds of lead and arsenic that sit underneath ASARCO. It does not address what is on the 500 other acres of ASARCO land. We need to tear that up and start over. We need the EPA to take over this cleanup site. The TCEQ has demonstrated that it is not acting in El Paso's interest, and we need a TCEQ that will work in El Paso's interest. We need the city and the taxpayers of El Paso paid back for the $1.4 million that they had to spend to defend our interest. And finally, and this is the best part, this is the happy part, we need to listen to these UTEP students, this talent that will describe our future on what this city looks like in the next 10 years, the next generation, and get a consensus plan for what is the highest and best use for one of our most historic sites. I come here today humbled by all of your participation in this effort. We've come so far and have so much to celebrate. And we're going to celebrate today as only El Paso knows how to celebrate. But tomorrow, we're going to roll up our sleeves, Mayor, Congressman Reyes, our senators, Governor Richardson, our friends in Chihuahua who've helped us so much get to this point, because the next stage is a real cleanup for a great town. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for being part of a great movement in a great community. Adios y gracias.